So I guess I wanted to start off with an idea from each of the panelists, and I'll start with you, Kevin. What do you think is the future of the trilateral relationship, and is there a promise for a larger vision for North America, do you think?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I just wanted to pass on some regrets. My boss, David Morrison, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Americas, was scheduled to be here, but unfortunately he got pulled away. So I'm your consolation prize. In terms of the grand vision, I think we're taking a very sort of pragmatic, practical approach to this now. So, I mean, we certainly recognize that the Obama administration is coming to an end at the end of this year, and our primary focus is trying to achieve as much as we possibly can in terms of the trilateral relationship during the remaining 8 months of the Obama administration. So I guess this is not really the time for grand visions, but this is the time to from our perspective, very much to renew the relationship, renew the commitment to trilateralism as a part of the government's sort of broader agenda of a reinvigorated relationship with the United States and with Mexico. And to make incremental progress on a range of issues across the horizon. So, in terms of broad visions, we're conscious of the political reality in which we're in, but committed nonetheless to making as much progress as we possibly can on a range of issues. And we can talk a little bit more about what some of those broader themes will be. But just if I could just say, in terms of bridges or walls, what's the future? I think very much the perspective of the Canadian government is that bridges are the way to go. Just wanted to lay that down. Just get that out there.
Steve?
Well, yeah, I'd certainly agree with Kevin's comments. The issue of where's now's going. It strikes me that trilateralism is really the wave of the future. The lowering of barriers between the two countries, among all the three countries, is really critical. The countries are, of course, very well integrated to begin with, but NOWS, I think, is a process that can facilitate that, speed it up, and bring the three countries together in ways that are significantly more efficient and that benefit all the countries significantly more than they do now. There's certainly a strong commitment on the part of the U.S. government to trilateralism. I think that there's a deep understanding that we're all going to benefit from this. We have such a massive economic relationship. The trilateral economic relationship is $1.2 trillion a year, at least it was in 2015. So there's a tremendous economic incentive to bring the three countries closer and closer together. And there's also a matter of geography, and there's also a matter of shared values. And all those come together to really make it imperative that the three of us come together, work together towards common goals, and the result is going to be benefit to all three countries, I think.
Now, Yvonne has just come to Canada. How many months now, Evelyn?
3.5 months.
3.5 months, and Stephen is on his way out, so you're kind of crossing paths in the capital. But Yvonne, what do you think?
I think, bonjour, nice to be here. I'm so glad to share with you some of the ideas that have been around. I agree partially in what you just mentioned, Kevin and Steve, but I think it's a very good opportunity now to move in the agenda. The world has changed a lot. The world is not the same that when we signed NAFTA. Just to put some data in front, in 2000, 90% of the global exports were NAFTA countries, and now it's 13%. But the Asians are gaining the market. Now, in 2000, it was around 28, and now it's 34. Then the world is changing. And I think one of the important things is that after 20 more years of NAFTA in place, that Mexico and U.S., we have the supply chains that work very well, and they work it out in both ways, and jobs are secure for both countries, in with Canada too. Because one of the things that I have heard a lot is that the jobs are going down, and this is the only reason that Mexico is growing and having all these things there. But I don't think so, because Mexico is more than only that. We have a demographic thing. The average of age of the population is 27 years. And I mean, in that sense, we have more to compete in the competition than just jobs. And I think it's a very good opportunity now to move the agenda, because NAFTA, in a sense, has to be upgraded, has to be moved forward, not just lowering tariff, not just non-tariff barriers to lower down there. It has to be some other issues that used to be moved in WTO. But now WTO is not moving ahead more than in dispute settlement. Then my point of view is that it's a good chance now to do something trilateral and more than just trade, goods, services, and investment. Energy or innovation, exchange of technology, the supply chains. I mean, it's a lot of room for opportunities.
And Céline, I mean, you come at this from a private sector perspective. What's your vision of North America and where you see things at?
Well, I guess I see an opportunity for the enrichment of integration at some practical levels. And so, as examples, we saw some of those, some areas where we can work together, for example, in the joint declaration with the President and the Prime Minister following their visit. Regulations regarding methane, regulations regarding decarbonization of our economies. There's a great deal of work to be done, and in a sense, these are, I suppose you could call them idiosyncratic, in that they're specific, practical, not grand vision, very much working level kinds of things. There are also new areas, where we're going to have to, as in the global community, decarbonize financial markets, and so how do we learn from each other? The way, are we going to set up green investment banks? If we are, then, can we do that in a way where there's some institutional sharing across our trilateral partnership?
I'm going to come back to you on that one. But Agustín, you are in the middle of a campaign, and obviously we're talking a lot about this because we can't ignore what's going on in the United States right now and some of the anti-NAFTA, anti-trade rhetoric that we're hearing almost on a daily basis. And your foundation recently put out a very interesting video trying to dispel some myths or promote the image of Mexico, which I encourage you all to look at on YouTube. But what do you think about what you're hearing, and what was the message that you're carrying to the public? I guess mostly in the United States, so you're directing your message too. But
thanks, Jennifer. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. So I'm terrified, to be perfectly frank. And let's not kid ourselves. This is the most important North American Leaders Summit ever. We're arriving at a time where there is an existential threat to the North American project. There's an existential threat to peace and prosperity in our region. When I talk in Canada, and I've had the opportunity to do so on several occasions, it's hard for Canadians to understand the U.S.-Mexico relationship. It's hard for Americans and Mexicans to understand the U.S.-Mexico relationship. It is the most intense relationship between two large countries anywhere. You're talking about across the board, no other country has more impact on the daily lives of Americans than Mexico does. Whether you're talking about 35 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans, equivalent to the population of Canada, that are in the United States, 80% of which are either U.S. citizens or legal residents. That is, the Mexican experience in the United States is not an undocumented experience. Or you're talking about the fact that at any given time there are between 1 and 3 million Americans in Mexico, which is between 4 and 12 times more than second-place Canada. Whether you're talking about the fact that we have the most legally cross-border in the world, 330 ports of entry, the numbers are staggering. The only place outside of Washington, D.C. where every U.S. government agency is represented is Mexico City. And, of course, we have the largest consular presence of any country anywhere in the United States. So it speaks to the intensity of this relationship. And I would like to pick up on what Kevin said with respect to shared values. Because one of the things that we've seen is that our lack of understanding of the fact that we have a privileged corner of the world is now leading us to take this for granted. And the ignorance with respect to that and our inability to cherish that is now putting us in a position which we really, really, really should not be in. So we live in two worlds, right? The world of integration, competitiveness, jobs, growth, the world that we inhabit, most of us, here at this event, and then in this world, NAFTA is this unmitigated success, and to doubt it is to quote Spock, illogical, right? It doesn't compute. So, and then there's the world of political campaigns where trade only generates losses and unemployment, and wealthy countries and unemployment in wealthy countries and exploitation, child labor in poor countries. And in this alternate universe of beggar thy neighbor policies, Canada's trade surplus, for example, with the United States is a sign of American weakness and Canadian abusiveness, right? It's the zero-sum game view of the world, which is really profoundly un-Canadian and really profoundly un-American in my view. So we have a U.S. Chamber of Commerce study that says that 14 million American jobs depend directly on NAFTA. But the image that resonates is of these mutinous workers at the Carrier plant that want to lynch management because the company is closing their factory and opening one in Mexico. But there's no mention of the fact that Carrier's main competitor is Samsung, right, who manufactures in China. So by moving to Mexico, they can still source within North America. And if they didn't do it, then they would simply fold and there would be no employment for anybody, right? So that part of the story is never told. It's just this idea that it's beggar thy neighbor. And so the part of the story that says that 40 cents on every dollar that the U.S. imports from Mexico is American content, 40 cents. Such that we trade together. Yes, we trade together, but we make stuff together, right? The figure for Canada, which is also very integrated, is 26 cents. The figure for China is 4 pennies. So, I mean, really, if you spend 5 minutes thinking about this, it shows you what's behind it. And so, with respect to the rhetoric, of course, I mean, if it's not obvious to everybody that U.S. prosperity and even national security depend on a stable and cooperative Mexico, I mean, you really haven't thought about it very much, right? Even the Pentagon has studies on this showing that if the U.S. had to worry about its borders, like really worry about its borders, then it could not be a world power. And that's not me saying it. These are studies that have been done by the U.S. Department of Defense. And so here we are in this strange parallel universe where everything is turned upside down. The anti-reason movement is really capturing the imagination of a lot of Americans, and it's very, very frightening. So when I was at a Canada 2020 event here in Ottawa in February, I joked that if we really wanted to improve Canada-Mexico relations, that we would need a Donald Trump in the White House. And at the time it was funny, but now it really actually... But now it requires a planned policy response.
I was going to ask you about that. Actually.
Yeah.
I mean, Would you like to hear Canada saying more?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think and with this I'll finish. But so R2 governance needs to start thinking of how to deal with with our shared superpower neighbor turning into a very rich sort of Venezuela, right? So you have this possibility, and Canada is going to face. I mean, Canada is going to face if this prospers. Canada is going to face some very tough decisions. I don't think people have realized that. I mean, it could. Canada will come to that point where it needs to be. It will need to decide whether it's going to do the sort of Lord Chamberlain thing, peace in our time, or whether it's going to do the Churchill thing and say, no, stand on principle and say this is unacceptable. And in my view, it needs to do that, and it needs to make that decision. Because to think that this is in any way that appeasement is possible in this context, I think is ludicrous. And we've started hearing some issues with respect to Canada on behalf of these candidates. I was reading an article in the Globe and Mail. It was yesterday, was it, or the day before?
Perhaps.
Basically speaking about how the rhetoric could very quickly turn into one of against Canada, precisely because in this world of zero-sum games, Canada's trade surplus with the United States is a threat somehow in this fantasy. It's a threat to the United States. So I would just ask the Canadians to start thinking about that, because these are very difficult decisions that we could be making very soon.
Well, and Donald Trump did hold a news conference right at the Canadian border in British Columbia, I think, pretty pointedly. And I'm not going to put Kevin and Steve on the spot on this one, but I want to ask Yvonne, and I don't expect you to comment on Donald Trump specifically, but what is the danger of a prolonged anti-North America, anti-NAFTA rhetoric, do you think, for our countries?
Well, this is not new. You know, during the NAFTA negotiations, I was part of this team. And it was Ross Perot at that time, sucking sound of the South. And, I mean, it's always some voices that really lead to the protectionist. It's just, this time, sorry, but it's a very nasty discussion. That's the only thing. They use a very bad wording. Even my English is not the best. But, I mean, the way they talk about it now is a little more emotional and nonsense. But it's always been there. It has always been there. Protectionists against free trade. But I mean, just to look at some data, you know, I was with one of my friends from a consulting firm in New York, and he published that the U.S. has lost more jobs to the computers than all plants going to China or Mexico or the rest of the world. It's just that, you know, they wanted to blame or what is going on there in one thing.
Obviously, since I value my job, I'm not going to comment on anything to do with the U.S. election, but just make a very general observation, and that is that historically the United States has been a very, very pro-free trade nation, and that's a policy that has been consistently followed by members of both parties when they've occupied the Oval Office. And when I look at the history of both international trade and domestic politics in the United States, a comparison of those two, to me, suggests that free trade and a more internationalist approach to issues has traditionally been the stronger of those two competing forces.
Now, Céline, I wanted to ask you, you made reference to this a little bit earlier, but in terms of trade, do you think there's maybe a more nuanced view that we could be taking now that we're talking so much about climate change and the cost of doing business, which is not just moving things around, but also the cost of using fossil fuels and so on. Is there another conversation that maybe the three countries should be having about that?
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting and tricky conversation in the sense that it would be easy to conflate an anti-internationalist message with being against trade because we need to start pricing carbon into trade, right? And so the response may be, but that's an anti-trade perspective. It's not. It's actually the coming together of two fundamental themes, which are the theme of international trade and the need for us to reduce carbon emissions at the same time. With the Paris Treaty, we've all agreed that we are going to target no more than 2 degrees of warming. Canada's target is to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030 from a 2005 baseline. We're going to have a hard time meeting that target. We're going to have to do a lot of work, and we're going to need to do that with our important trading partners in the process. And part of that is going to be, as we do price carbon, is going to be how we establish border carbon adjustments. And that has to be done within a positive and constructive sort of institutional sort of setting. And I'll be honest with you, I think that our institutional capacity needs to grow in order to do that. At the moment, we have cap and trade agreements between sub-sovereign levels in the U.S. and in Canada under the Western Climate Initiative. That's, I guess you could call it a pre-institutional sort of setting in which to have these discussions about border carbon adjustments. And as we become more granular in our climate change plans, at a national level and at a sub-sovereign level, we are going to have to start deciding, well, what are the institutional channels through which we're going to have discussions about internalizing a price on carbon when one jurisdiction has a price. For example, cement is very, very energy dependent. The price of cement, when there's a price on carbon, is going to be quite different from the price of cement when there isn't one. So how are we going to deal with that, as an example?
So, and there seems to be a lot of hope, Kevin, around the three countries coming up with something fairly concrete on the issue of collaboration on energy and the environment. And I wonder if you could maybe signal a little bit about what we can expect from the NALs without scooping your prime minister. Yeah. What can we expect to hear specifically on the energy and environmental file, do you think?
Well, perhaps just before I answer that question, if I could just respond to something that Agustín raised, and I'm metaphorically in exactly the position that we don't in Canada want to be in, between Mexico on one side and the United States on the other. But I think long before the developments in the recent in the presidential election in the United States, the Liberal Party's commitment was to renew our bilateral relationship with Mexico. They have committed to addressing some long-standing issues that are of a bilateral nature, and then also very much committed to sort of reinvigorating the trilateral relationship within North America. Now, from a Canadian perspective, we know extremely well that the vast majority of our trade and economic relationship is with the United States. Our relationship with Mexico is growing. There are some sectors in the economy that are highly integrated, such as the automotive sector, the aerospace sector. Canadian mining firms are amongst the most the largest investors in the mining industry within Mexico. So sort of on its own, we've got a robust bilateral relationship with Mexico that this government is very intent on improving, regardless of what happens within the United States. But we do have to be, I think, very conscious of where our primary economic interests lie. We have substantial institutional linkages between our Canadian government departments and agencies with the United States, with extremely well-developed and long-standing institutional linkages. With Mexico, our linkages are not nearly as strong. One of the things that this government really wants to do is to try to strengthen those institutional linkages on a bilateral level. Whether these can be trilateralized really depends on the particular context. So I'll give you an example. Canada and the United States have an extremely robust regulatory cooperation framework. And there are certain areas where it makes sense to trilateralize this regulatory cooperation framework with Mexico, but there are many other areas where it doesn't, where we're just not there yet. So the level of institutional integration between Canada and the U.S. Is of a different nature at this particular juncture. So we will continue to engage in a wide range. Take the military is another example. We have NORAD. So you have a fairly intense embedded relationship between the Canadian and the U.S. military. We don't have those types of linkages nearly to the same degree as we do with Mexico. So when we're looking at this, we are very much conscious of just the extent of our relationship between our immediate southern neighbor, and then looking for opportunities where we can to integrate our bilateral relationship with Mexico into a trilateral perspective. In terms of the nows and in terms of sort of foreshadowing some of the things that are coming up, I guess there's only so many ways you can divide up the policy pie, right? You've got obviously economic prosperity issues or competitiveness issues. You've got environmental issues and energy issues. There's defense and security issues, and then there are sort of how do we work together in either a regional perspective or a global perspective, and I think you'll see many of those same types of themes coming through in this NALS, only because there's only a finite number of issues, and you can just classify them in only a finite number of ways. But I think as with the Prime Minister's visit to Washington in March, where climate change and clean energy was a real focal point, without disclosing too much, I think you could probably read into the fact that this government is very committed to addressing the challenges of climate change. The Obama administration, as well as Peña Nieto's administration, are all on the same wavelength in that regard. So that will feature, I think, fairly prominently in the agenda of the leaders as they come up.
And I wanted to pick up on you started off talking about the bilateral relationship between Canada and Mexico, and I think it's no secret that it had a bit of a valley for the last 10 years, especially over the visa issue. Canada and Mexico, and I mean Agustín, you've lived through the visa issue. If you didn't know this, Agustín's father was ambassador to Canada. And I think you even knew Justin Trudeau as a
We're
child.
We're exactly the same age, and we have a swimming pool at the residence that was built by my father, and so Justin, at the age of 8, would come over and swim.
And but I mean, how is, just you personally, how has the visa issue impacted you?
Well, we spoke about this briefly, but yeah, I mean, seriously, Canada, my God. It's really funny, and of course I spoke with Ambassador Allary about this, and he's perfectly aware. And we picked this up since Ambassador Brzezinski was down there when he was the poor guy who actually had to implement this thing. It's funny because Canada is so efficient in so many areas, and in visas. I mean, independent of whether you're going to take it away or not, which I of course believe that it needs to go like right now. Consider that we don't have visas for anywhere in Europe, for example. I mean, we don't have visas for Japan. I mean, it's not an issue anywhere else except except for the United States and Canada. But Canada, one of the things that happens with Canadian visas for some strange reason is that it goes into this very weird bureaucratic netherworld where, I kid you not, the stack of papers that you need to input is this big. I had to tell them what my father-in-law does for a living. There's no way to renew it. This is my third visa. There's no way to renew it. You're applying as if you were brand new every single time. I mean, and I went through global entry. I have global entry, so I've gone through FBI background checks. Nothing compares to trying to apply for a visa in the United States. But what in Canada. And so that's something that I would ask you to review if possible, because it really does not do justice to this country, a country that I love and grew up with. Very quickly, with respect to North American energy integration. So I hosted a green energy summit, a binational green energy summit, U.S.-Mexico, in San Antonio last week. And so one of the things that's really interesting that came out of that, we had a commissioner from the Department of Energy of the United States, and they're doing the first fully North American analysis of energy integration. So the DOE is very soon going to come out, apparently, with this study, which I think is groundbreaking. I mean, it's very exciting to have the Department of Energy in the United States actually thinking about this on a continent-wide basis. And part of the reason, of course, is because Mexico did have our energy reform, which I was in Congress at the time. We did in our 62nd legislature, and so it's a very exciting time for energy integration. Of course, we have to understand that the virtual candidate of the Republican Party is a climate change denier. Right, and I mean, nothing new here, right? And West Virginia, which is one of the places where he's campaigned very hard, he actually really, really wants, or has told the coal miners in West Virginia that he's going to do everything possible to get all of that coal, as much of the coal, out of the ground, and to have as much dirty air as we can have possible. So that's a reality that we are looking at in North America that could change everything. And with respect to those to the military ties that have been very hard won by Canada and the United States, fighting side by side in some of the major wars, one of which I thought we had drawn some conclusions that are obviously are being forgotten now. But one of the things that's also going on behalf of this of the Republican candidate is the fact that NATO is a group of free riders, right? And Canada doesn't have one of the highest military spendings. And so we could also see a president in the United States that sees Canada as a free rider in the defense realm. I mentioned this just so we get an idea of the scope of the issues in front of us. It's massive. But I do want to give you, and with this I'll just leave you with a hopeful note, because I was very excited. We're seeing massive amounts of investment in green energy. As you know, Mexico has 35% as a target. It's one of the most ambitious targets in the world for green energy. It looks like we're actually going to make it, something that when we legislated it, we were like, really, 35%? Wow, that's going to be hard. Sort of, but it actually looks like we're going to make it. We've reached a tipping point with respect to green energy, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in terms of North American energy integration.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to ask Steve, we mentioned NAFTA quite a bit here, but there's also TPP, which is really much in the forefront right now. And I wanted to find out, is there any way that the three countries could work together in the context of the TPP? Would there be anything that we could hive off so that we could have sort of more strategic advantage as a bloc within the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, we've talked quite a bit this afternoon about how integrated the three economies are and how they're becoming more and more integrated. I think that one obvious benefit to the countries of North America, to TPP, is expanded sales to the Asian countries. Obviously, TPP encompasses 40% of the world's market, about 800 million consumers. And given, as we were talking about earlier, there is so much that goes back and forth among the three countries in producing anything, whether it's aircraft, cars, food. If one country increases its sales to Asia, that's going to have a positive effect on the other two countries. And I think that is one way in which TPP is going to benefit the NALS countries very significantly. There are a number of things that TPP will bring to the North American countries that are not there already under NAFTA. Obviously, NAFTA was put together in 1994. A lot of things have changed since then, particularly dealing with business and economics. So TPP will address a number of digital commerce issues. TPP focuses on issues like labor and environment protection that were not a part of the NAFTA agreement. And it updates a lot of the things that were addressed as well as they could have been in 1994. But given how fast the world has changed and how much it's changed since NAFTA came into existence, TPP will offer a tremendous upgrade to the countries that are original partners to NAFTA, but it will also increase their ability to sell overseas. And because of the linkage, I think it's pretty clear that the economic benefit of those increased exports is going to be something that the people of all three countries are going to be able to take advantage of.
Yvonne, you mentioned WTO, and it was like, oh my God, WTO, like that's the slowest moving thing I think that we could talk about here. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you think the three countries could do in that context?
I will start first talking about the plurilateral negotiations like TPP, because in Mexico we believe that TPP is really the upgrade of NAFTA in many ways. In other areas, NAFTA is still the champion, like in agriculture, open between Mexico and U.S. TPP does not go that all the way. But I mean, in Mexico, we start the process in the Congress for the approval of TPP. Mm-hmm. And we believe that the end of this year will be in place. And why talking about this? Why TPP is now there? It's because before, during the NAFTA negotiation, it was WTO, the place to discuss some of general, issues like government procurement or, investment and things like that. And since, discussions over there are not that fast anymore,
no.
Just to put it in some way, that's why we have these plurilateral agreements.
Tell us about what you think concretely. Like, there's a lot. When I hear the countries talk about their climate agenda, the environment agenda, they talk a lot about exchanges of students, exchanges between companies, incubators. I'll haul out all the buzzwords that you want. But do you think there's anything else that they should be doing a little bit more concretely? You just mentioned earlier infrastructure bank and for green infrastructure. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, one of the things that obviously the government of Canada has really focused on is to move towards more of a demand-side-based economic model, so a more Keynesian model. And that entails a lot of investment from the state, and that will redress some of the deficits that we have in terms of our infrastructure. And I know similar deficits have been pointed out in the U.S. By Michael Bloomberg as an example. So there is going to be quite a lot of investment in infrastructure. This will require us to develop some new approaches. And so there'll be some new institutional capacity to be built in this regard. Green investment banks are now starting to be established, at the state level or at the sub-sovereign level. Some of them do things like aggregate energy efficiency projects so that they can easily be bundled and securitized because they're actually great investments. I don't know if you're aware, but the market for green bonds is one where you put a green bond out for several $1 billion and it's sold in 5 minutes. So there's far more demand for green bonds than there's any supply. So the demand for opportunities to participate in these kinds of infrastructure investments is there, but we don't have the supply yet. So we need to bundle those projects up. Some of them will be energy efficiency, some of them will be renewable energy, some of them will be more innovative, liquid fuels, green biochemistry. I mean, there'll be different types of things, but some of them will have technical risk, which the bond markets will not accept, and therefore there'll need to be new insurance products, and so that's a whole new field of innovation. And wouldn't it be interesting if we had that to work together on, on a trilateral basis, for us to share our learnings, to share also obviously the legal frameworks in which these new financial instruments are being developed, because it's new. I mean, we've not done these things before. I might also add that in terms of trade, we don't have the greatest visibility in terms of what is going on a global basis in trade in environmental goods. In Canada, we believe it or not, we track buggy whips and riding crops on our national accounts. If you go into the most aggregated level of Canada's national export and trade accounts, we actually have a line item there. But if you looked for something that was essential for our being successful to achieve our climate change goals, energy efficiency goods or renewable energy equipment, you would find none of it. And so, there is a plurilateral process underway right now at the WTO for better trade terms for environmental goods trade. I've done a preliminary index of global trade in environmental goods, just the manufactured ones, the things that we need to decarbonize our energy systems that we've just been discussing. And that trade is equivalent to 2/3 that of the whole of the automotive industry in the world. It's now at $2 trillion compared to $3.6 trillion for automotive. So this is not, an emerging sort of, still to be set up sector. I mean, this is very big trade, very big business, with significant employment associated, significant innovation associated with it, and policy that's required as well. So one thing that we might do is work together to create national account standards to have the same rigor in reporting on our trade in what we need to decarbonize the planet as we do the barrels of oil that we trade, because we count barrels of oil as though they were our children. But we have no idea about global trade in what we need to move to a decarbonized economy. So I think that would be a very interesting project for us to work on together.
Data is good. More data is good. We're running out of time for this portion, and I want to allow some questions from our audience or from people from the media.